Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to a very important panel discussion about small businesses. I was told that I needed to open up the panel discussion by talking about. See, if you hold off, it sounds like it's going to be impressive, and then people stop. So I was told I had to start by reminding people to turn off their phones, but since I'm the moderator, I'm going to change that. If your ringer is set to something like Stone Temple Pilots, Metallica, Muse, anything that might shake it up a little bit, I encourage you to keep it on. In fact, but that'd be fine. In fact, if I had time, I was going to put on something myself and have a friend call me to make the joke better, which it sounds like I really should have done. So we have about an hour, and we have an excellent panel here. We're going to go through a number of questions and keep it free-flowing, and we'll try to leave a little bit of time for some Q&A in case there's some interest in asking the panelists what's happening. Let me just go through the bios of our great crew here. So to my left is Jeanine Jerkovic. Been a friend for a very long time, brainstormed on economic development issues for a long time, economic development director for the city of Surprise, and one of the best at understanding what makes the economy tick. And I was impressed when a number of people came in and said, "We're here because you're here." I was pretending they were talking like past you to me, but that clearly wasn't the case because I'm an economist and no one likes to talk to an economist. I don't like to talk to economists. And then we have my friend Thomas Barr, Vice President of Business Development for Local First Arizona, advocate for strong local business development throughout the state. We could go on and on with these bios, but they are posted on the website if you want to look at additional detail. And I believe this event is being recorded, so it'll be posted somewhere, hopefully not edited in any weird way, but if that's the case, it'll give me a chance to make my first jokes a little bit more funny. And then we have Debbie Hann, Chief Operating Officer for ASBA, Arizona Small Business Association. And what I love about brainstorming with her is that she brings corporate and small business knowledge to the discussion. And so truly done a lot of panels and talking about economics. And my favorite thing are the panel discussions, whether being a moderator or on the panel, because it's fun just to have it free flow. Nobody really likes to see 100 slides worth of economic charts. There's a few twisted people, but those are the economists usually. But this is going to be a great discussion, and I just wanted to open it up a little bit with what we observed during the last year, and actually even over the last 10 years. When we went through the Great Recession a while back, the state policymakers realized, and local policymakers, economic developers, realized that we had to do something different in terms of how we build the economy. We had to think a little bit more outside the box. And so there was a lot of advancement. We became more competitive in certain tax categories. We created economic development programs. We happened to do a review of the economic development programs that the state had at that time, and we had one. And it was wiped out before we were able to publish our report, so I had to change it to 0 and delete a whole section on it. It was a workforce program that was gutted, and it was because we just weren't prepared for the scale of the recession. Well, we're doing much better now, but we shifted to talk about base sector industries, which you need to. You have to figure out how you're going to bring in these big base sector businesses because it creates demand for a lot of the local businesses. But I think what going through the last year has really showed us is that you can have some disruptions in the economy. Like we went through a terrible pandemic, we had a steep recession that rebounded quickly as expected because of how it worked. But we got to see how just a short disruption in economic activity was devastating for small businesses. But what I like to do is I want to flip it around. If you can say one thing happens and it has a certain impact, then the opposite must have an impact as well, which means I think that instead of just having a focus on how we recruit the biggest businesses, what if we also continue to focus on small business development? What can we do to make them more profitable? How can we integrate them with the economy? Small businesses are always very willing to create apprenticeship programs. They work with universities and other educational institutions. They really are the backbone of what makes the economy tick. And so, unfortunately, we had that very difficult economic time, but people tend to change their thinking when you go through tough times. When things are great, there's not as much interest to maybe rock the boat. When you're challenged, whether it's personally or your business or a city or an organization, you realize that you have to maybe make some improvements. And so that's where I want to kind of focus some of the discussion. It's how can we continue to advance this new kind of messaging, this new focus on small business development, how it might impact the urban areas, but how it impacts the rural areas as well, how it will have an impact short-term, mid-term, long-term, how we can bring them into the discussion. And I feel strongly about that, and so this is what's great about doing this panel. So now that I rambled, I just want to do a few starter questions to kick it off. And so I'd like to start with Debbie, if that's okay. Can you just elaborate on the mission of ASBA, and what are some of the organizations, communities, businesses, things like that you work with? And it can just be at a very high level, but just so that everybody can kind of hear. Most people are familiar with Small Business Association, but if you can explain that in a little bit more detail, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So I guess I need to use this, right? Hello, can you hear me? Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for being, it's an honor to be on the panel. Oh, I can't hear, it's not on. Oh, talk it close, okay. Can you hear me now? Obviously you can tell that I'm not used to this, so bear with me. Thank you for being on the panel. I appreciate that. I know that just what Jim was just saying, that if anything, we have realized that small businesses are so critical to the economy. And, everybody says that, but I think the pandemic actually showed it, that how absolutely critical it is. So I just wanted to say I agree with that. ASBA has been around, believe it or not, almost 50 years. And so when we look at the mission that we have, it's pretty much the same from 50 years ago. It's pretty much being able to drive a better work environment for small businesses, and continue to do that so that businesses can utilize the tools, resources, and programs. So that's pretty similar to what's, from even 50 years ago. We want to create that great environment, business environment for small businesses. What's different is that when you look at what happened with the pandemic, wow, we had to pivot, change things around. What can we do to small businesses to help them be successful? And one of the things that ASBA does is we do look outside the box, and we have to. We're a very small team. It's a very small team. There's only 4 of us. And so, but I always say we're a small and mighty team. And but one of the things that we came up with was the community give back. And the community give back is where we work with the large organizations and economic development organizations, the big companies, and said, hey, can you help us with this and do a community give back to the small businesses. And so we have them sponsor small businesses so that they can participate and be part of the Small Business Association and be able to utilize all of the resources that we are able to provide for them. And so a perfect example is, and I'm a cheerleader too for City of Surprise. They are fantastic. They jumped on and supported us with this. And so it's a win-win though when you think about it, because for City of Surprise to do a community give back, it's not only supporting the small businesses in your area, it's the outreach. It's all of us combined and utilizing all our resources. We're not in a silo. We're expanding and helping everybody, and it expands to more small businesses out there. So it's just so important for us to be able to help small businesses and think differently, utilize the larger organizations and economic development, and just think differently. So we're a strong advocate of that. So anyway, so I don't know if you want to.
I thought that was excellent, and one thing that I took from that is organizations like yours and others, while you work with communities and small businesses and you have to advocate for them to be innovative, you have to be innovative as well, because you have to adjust your advising, research, based on what's happening. So in a way, the Economic Development Department, surprise, has to operate somewhat like a small business. Local first, same thing. All of us have, it's the same basic principles of who we advise, and I think that's fantastic. Jumping to you, Thomas. So we've had, it's been great to be able to do a lot of brainstorming with you all the last several months, and teaming up on some projects to really make some change. Your team is just fantastic. Even though you work in all different types of communities, I wanted to ask about more the rural areas. So what are some of the bigger challenges? And I guess I don't want to necessarily separate it between pre-COVID and COVID and post-COVID, but in general, I guess, what are some of the fundamental challenges that you've seen? And then what are some of the ones that have cropped up lately where you feel like it's been a little bit more difficult to get that report done? It's been a little bit more difficult to make that recommendation.
Sure, and I'll speak to rural, but I'll also speak to urban too, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So across the board, ask any small business, what do you need? Number one answer is always marketing. What's your biggest challenge? Access to capital. And so one of the stories I like to tell and remind people about is if we think back to April 2020, we saw a lot of businesses become numbers overnight, right? Because they were waiting for PPP loans and realized that a lot of the relationships that they had with these major financial institutions, mainly the big three, they were just placed as a number. It didn't matter if they were a customer for a year or a customer for 12 years. And so that challenge of lack of access to capital really goes into the infrastructure that we have in Arizona when it comes to our banking institutions and how we build partnerships with local banks and credit unions and CDFIs and lenders to be able to build capital for these businesses to be able to grow and expand and sustain themselves. In Arizona in 2013, 97% of our money was deposited into out-of-state banks and financial institutions. There are 8 rural counties in Arizona without any local banks in them. So we have a critical issue and a critical problem with lack of access to capital because of how our banking system is built and infrastructure across the state. And so at that time when Local First pulled those numbers from the FDIC, which anybody can pull from the FDIC's website, we said, we've got to get people to move their money. We've got to get more dollars into these local institutions because they're the ones that will, when a small business walks in, shake their hand, get to know their story, get to know their family, their vision, and build a relationship with them and give them funding to be able to sustain and grow their business. You pull the numbers this year and 91% of Arizona dollars are now deposited into the out-of-state banks. And so we've made a huge shift, but we got a long ways to go. And if we were to talk about that number one need that local businesses say they always need, which is marketing, I think there's a lot of opportunities for us as leaders and in city and town leadership to identify existing resources that are out there, not always having to come up with our own, but identify existing resources that are already out there that these small businesses can get access to. There are organizations, there are small businesses themselves out there to help, to provide technical assistance, to help businesses learn how to sell online, right? We had to overnight see all these small businesses adapt to all the changes that were happening day by day at times, right? Sometimes on Friday we would say something, Monday it would be a different story. And so we need to ensure that we as leaders within this infrastructure are identifying those resources and connecting the businesses to them and not always trying to come up with them on our own, so.
And when I opened up with that there's a lot of things that the economy that we have to be working on, what I found is when we've been doing advising on education issues, there's a lot of overlap and duplication of efforts, and it's not quite as efficient. Usually it's not a good idea overlapping with a good idea. Usually it's a bad idea overlapping with a bad idea, so it gets exponentially bad. But I feel like, but we're making improvements. It's just more complicated. In dealing with the small business issue, since we started getting more involved in this kind of research, I feel like it hasn't been duplicating one another, it's been complementing one another. And I feel like that's a good theme, and I feel like all of you kind of follow that. So Jeanine, it sounds like a softball question, but I'm going to make sure that if you don't answer it right, I'll ask you a follow-up. We're talking about base sector businesses, which you're an expert in identifying what makes the economy tick. We're talking about that you can calculate the spin-off businesses, and many of them are smaller, not all of them, but many. It's a challenge, though, as an economic development director to focus on both. And I feel like the really good ones across the state understand all the different things that make the economy tick, and they do talk about small businesses. They do talk about community amenities and things like that in addition to bringing in businesses. And you even team up with other communities nearby as you make an effort to get that business in, because you know how it expands. How do you manage that small business discussion as an economic development director when the focus has been so much on, in terms of identifying success, did you bring that 800 person business into Surprise? Not everybody understands how complex it is. How do you manage that?
It is a great question, and I'm assuming there are some small cities in the room. When we started our small business services in Surprise, it was the only thing. I mean, I'll say it was truly our hope. That's where we pinned our hopes. So I'm lucky to have leadership that understood that. And still continues to understand that, and continues to let us support the small business community. And so I'll just say we made it fundamental to what we do. So small business, we don't outsource it. We just said we assign an employee, we assign 2 employees, and it's what they do. And so it's making it a priority. And I was lucky to have a community that decided to dedicate city-owned space to help grow those small businesses. And this was back during the Great Recession. When you're trying to grow an economy and you're watching all of the cities around Arizona get big wins in semiconductor sectors and so forth, you have to start thinking about that economic gardening. And think about what is in your ecosystem. Those big businesses, they want to see that you've got an ecosystem of great companies and that you treat companies well. So I think it's making sure that you fundamentally build that small business value system, that you treat everybody from the large company to the small company the same. I think then that starts to build your reputation, and people start to hear that you're a great place to do business. So I think just knitting that in to your infrastructure, just becoming a place that you want small businesses and that they matter, I think that's kind of the fundamental of this. And then I think based on that, I mean, we were lucky to get some great small businesses in, build some great relationships, and grow some of those companies. And honestly, they give you such great feedback. When you build relationships with companies, they start to tell you why they chose your community, and the answers will always surprise you. And then that helps you build a capacity to start attracting those big companies. So I guess what I'm saying is, building those small companies, it's fundamental to your practice, and all of those things will help you build big companies. And in fact, we found out that all of the same questions that small businesses were asking us, all of the things that they needed, some big companies from outside of Arizona and even outside of the country were asking us all of the same questions. So you start to realize when companies cross a border, when companies enter your state, there's a new set of rules and they behave like small businesses. So when you become proficient in helping those small businesses, it will help you across the board. So I think that's maybe how we balanced that as a priority.
See, that was a good answer, but I'm going to go ahead and start with you anyways, and then go back the other direction. So I want to shift to just some of the COVID challenges a bit. When it hit, we saw a dramatic impact. Everybody probably saw charts where it showed employment losses for the state. But if you break it down into income groups and the different occupations, it was a dramatically different impact on restaurants, lower wage workers. It wasn't even close. We're starting to recover, but those lower wage workers, or at least until recently, were having a hard time getting by, and there was a lot of stimulus put out there that went into the pockets of individuals. And some argue that maybe we overstimulated the economy and we made it a little bit of a disincentive to come back, and that's been pushing up wages On the way in, I have an office on Mill and Tempe, and I just happened to see a new sign going up where it said $15 an hour for opening, and I thought it might have said dishwasher and then other kitchen cleaning things. Well, that means that we still have this lasting effect from what happened with COVID. The federal government is difficult to deal with. We can talk to our congressional delegation, but there's also things that we can do here locally. Are there any public policy items that you've done or you've seen at the state level where you feel like we need to continue or enhance? In other words, what can we do to support what you do?
That's a great question. And I wish I was a great policy thinker like you, but so I'll just give you my my impression. I saw a lot of small businesses struggling to attract those workers, and it surprised me that a lot of their workers, when push came to shove, they were afraid of COVID. They were afraid of getting there was the stimulus money, but more or less people were afraid of getting COVID, and they were afraid of the vaccine. And I don't judge that. That was just what I was hearing, and that seemed to be 75% of the feedback I was getting. And paired with that, I started to get questions from a lot of small businesses about not only how do they adjust their wages, can we give them more resources, can we give them more grant money, and maybe that's an answer, so that they can be competitive and competitively priced, pay $15 for their dishwasher or whatever they need to do. But a lot of them started asking me the same questions that I'd never heard before from a small business perspective at least, and that's, how can I get access to benefits for my employees? How can I, and I thought maybe there's something there, because if everybody's afraid, if they're 15 hour a week employee, or their part-time employee, I understand why that employee, maybe they've got childcare issues, maybe they're afraid of getting COVID, and it's easier just to take the check. I certainly understand that. But if it's truly a healthcare concern, and I think if we find a way to empower the small business industry through like some co-opting and helping those small businesses get access to better employee benefits somehow. So I think I'm hearing that more and more, and I'm really trying to wrap my head around that.
We all are. That's a good point. Thomas, you were mentioning access to capital. Sometimes things can be done at the state level, sometimes not. Sometimes you have to have some innovation in the private sector to figure out a way of channeling money towards individuals that may not, or businesses that may not typically get a loan based on the archaic way that we evaluate credit scores, and there could be more innovative ways. But given how you've worked so closely with the businesses and the communities and kind of the entire issue in general, in addition to the access to capital issue, is there anything that maybe some state or local policymakers have proposed or you've proposed that hasn't gained traction, but maybe as a group we can get a little coalition going to start advocating for some of this stuff?
Sure. Well, I'll actually give you something that did work and is working right now, and we can continue to work on it and grow it and build it. So one of the things at Local First Arizona that we did last year is we started our own small business relief fund. And we raised money to give out in micro grants to small businesses in every single county of the state. So we realized March 17th that there were going to be businesses with 3 or less employees that were going to have trouble putting food on the table for their kids. And so we raised about $2 million as quickly as we could, and then we worked with the state of Arizona and the governor's office, who then tapped us to distribute $10 million in grants to restaurants and any venue that was forced to close over the summer. And through all of that, what we were able to do is really get in on the ground floor with these businesses and predict what was going to happen this year, which was they were going to have a hard time trying to compete with the larger companies and attracting people to come back to their businesses, right? We had to be the best predictors possible in coaching and engaging not only the businesses, but advocating on their behalf. And so about 10 months ago, we started having conversations saying we need to come up with plans in order to provide small businesses the opportunity to incentivize the rehiring or the increase of wages of the staff that they have. And so you may all know, or you may all seen, or maybe you don't know, but about 13 or 14 days ago, the state of Arizona just opened up a fund of $5 million that small businesses under 25 employees could apply to use for attracting staff back to be hired or for the increase of wages of their current staff up to $10,000. Those are the types of programs we need to be working on together. These are the types of inequities that we need to identify as organizations and institutions, and then think on every level. Not only are those dollars going to be important, but there's other funding out there too. I can't tell you the number of small businesses I talk to every single day that have never heard of the employee retention credit. These are thousands and thousands of dollars that small businesses have access to for retaining their employees, for showing a loss for each quarter they may have had in the last 3 years. We had 135 small businesses on a call today for something that was released over a year ago to learn about additional funding. And so there's things that are working, there's things that we can continue to improve, and those are two of them right there.
Just to build on that, and so as an economist, I always think I know more than I actually know when you look at forecasts versus historical data. Actually, we do a good job, but that was another bad joke that we're going to edit out, fortunately, because of how we set this up. So to build on that, one of the things that has frustrated me is there's a lot of funding, and it's already been money that's been taken out of our wallets, going to the federal government, then back to the states. So you want it to be used efficiently as possible. A lot of money that hasn't been moving yet. It needs to move more quickly because there's bigger problems now getting through these periods where we're not finding enough workers, there's limited funding to get the workers at the higher wage level, things like that. I've seen that there's a number of, I guess I'll call it an RFP, the different communities, so the governor's office, Maricopa County, Pima County, all the different counties, I'm not sure about the cities, but some cities have pretty sizable monies that they can distribute. It's a little frustrating to figure out how to get in front of them, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is I would like the bureaucracy to go out of it, because if somebody is charged with distributing $300 million and they also have to do their day job, their goal is going to be to distribute that $300 million, and you don't have the rest of the sentence that says as efficiently as possible, that'll build the economy and it'll give taxpayers a good return on investment. What has been your experience? Because it sounds like you've been very successful about putting some of these together, but what has been your experience with how different groups are expediting it, and is there anything that we can do to advise them?
Well, I'd advise building partnerships with those on the ground floor in the community that know the businesses well. That can be your Chamber of Commerce, that can be your small business association, that can be your local first. These types of groups that have the ears of the businesses and can help the process of distributing the funds really cut through a lot of red tape, right? There's a lot of applications that we saw over the last year for grant programs and things like that were really difficult to get through. And of course, there's always the protocol and the standardization and the things that the boxes we have to check to make sure that they're being distributed correctly. But if you can identify barriers that are going to exist for businesses in order to apply, if you can identify timing, if you can identify the ways that communities, organizations can coach businesses to apply for these funds and get their applications in, right? A lot of the times we talk about our rural communities not finding out about these things until the funds are let up, right? And so one of the things that we do at Local First is we build relationships with chamber organizations and leaders throughout every rural community throughout the state. So, once this $5 million went out, we were on the phone, we were calling them, making sure every small business possible knew about this. And so I think it's about the relationships with those that are on the ground, knowing that businesses have not been used to ever applying for these types of things. A lot of this is new to all of them. And so if you're doing this for the first time, you just can't expect that businesses are going to flock to you because you've opened up an application. So I think it's really about building and nurturing a relationship with those that are on the ground and listening to the advice that they can give you to help expedite the process and ensure that the funds get out quickly, but also get to the right people.
So I'll put you on the spot. you don't have to answer it, but what are maybe the top 3 groups that are just completely messing this up? And how can we lean on them to fix it? No,
I'm
I'm
gonna
kidding.
pass
I was
on that
saving
one.
that for Debbie. I was saving that for Debbie. So Debbie, we had great conversations about coordination and how even smaller organizations have to operate like a small business, and you have limitations in your funding as well. But there are so many things to do. When we recommend new public policy ideas, because there's limited resources, we always talk about return on investment, but a slightly different version, public policy return on investment. We talk about queuing, so you can figure out if you have 5 good ideas, what might we want to accomplish with the limited resources. How have you been handling that? Because I think that organizations that receive dues from members, when those businesses that you're helping have limited resources, it has to impact how you operate, but you've still been doing a fantastic job. How have you managed?
Well, I think we learned a lot with the pandemic, for sure. I think that with our, when I talked about the community give back, that is something that we realized that the small businesses, right at that point, they weren't interested in probably membership at ASVA. And so how did we able to reach out to them and let them know we have the resource, we want to help you and provide the information for you. And so, kind of piggybacking on what Thomas was saying, is that it is so important for all of us to work together, because I remember a year ago, and I mentioned this to Jim, that he had mentioned that it's economies of scale. We all have to work together, the associations, the chambers, the economic development, all of us, because we are in our own silos. And if we, kind of doing our own thing, then the small businesses, they're busy. They are trying to survive. They can't get people to work for them. So they're not out there reading our emails, or, they're out there working, trying to keep it going. And so somehow, if we can work together and not be in our own world, and obviously that's not, for everything. It's just that if we can be smarter about it and utilize the resources, like if you're doing a program, let us tweet, let us get it out there. Let's get that information out so that it can reach as many businesses as possible, because if they don't know, they don't know. And that's the hard part, is getting this information out to them. And I think, public policy is that's not my expertise either, but it's one of those things that it's so critical. Who are those people that are fighting for small businesses? Who are they? So small businesses just want to know that somebody is fighting for them. And so we just have to make sure that it's all of us combined is out there supporting them and fighting for them.
I'm out of my regular list, so I'm going to wing it. A lot of different groups are talking about what I said earlier, focus on small business. But what we're also seeing is that there's a lot of innovation and some change in the Arizona economy. There's actually discussions about getting involved in environmental technology. We did some work on that, and the economic gains are massive. Healthcare tech, bringing in universities to combine, to be doing additional research in immunology, virology, and talking to the defense sector, maybe even some biodefense. And it's difficult to navigate the political process to get there, but you keep trying and you keep trying. So when you have an economy that is starting to be more innovative, that gives small businesses an opportunity to do something different. How are you seeing that they're responding to these changes? Like in the Northwest area, all of a sudden there's going to be a lot of supplier businesses that some of those supplier businesses that are small businesses are going to have wages as high as what's in the big business going out there. How do we make sure that the businesses that aren't necessarily brought in by these larger corporations, but the businesses that we've been encouraging on our entrepreneurial, can keep up with all of these crazy, wonderful things happening in the Arizona economy, when even people that study this for a living have a hard time keeping up with it? And that's just for anybody.
No, it's a really interesting question. So how do you position your businesses to be resilient? I think from my perspective, you get obsessed with workforce. and that's changing. So, so and right now there are businesses failing, certainly, but I think you raise a really good point. Never squander a crisis, in the words of Winston Churchill. So there are a lot of people starting businesses, and you'll find in times of turmoil, that's when there's a surge of entrepreneurship. So I would say be ready to assist those people starting businesses. But again, be obsessed with workforce, and I think that's something I'm learning. So 6 months ago, I was not as obsessed with workforce as I am today, and just ruminating on how difficult it is for some of the employers that we're working with to draw their employees back. There's just been a significant number of people in the workforce that have just dropped out. It's probably a lot of moms that had a part-time job somewhere. So how do I, and a lot of remote workers that are just, they're comfortable with their situation. So it's getting us thinking about how do we really rethink what economic development is. And I don't have all of those answers, but it's how do I value those remote workers and that remote workforce? How do I give a report to council about how we build infrastructure to support, and what is the return on investment of helping that remote workforce? And how do I take that remote workforce and pair that with employers that may not want to put a big location in my community or even near my community, but they want to take advantage of the talent. And so it's gotten me thinking a lot about that. It's gotten me thinking a lot about attracting those great remote workers that maybe they're in white collar jobs, and how do we create a sense of place where they want to come. But it's also got me thinking a lot about how do we reach out to those that have been disproportionately affected by the change in workforce, and the people that are the restaurant workers or somebody that may not have a college degree. So it's drawing them back out, and I keep going back to they're not leaving and going to work at Chili's or the vacuum repair store because they don't want to get COVID. But maybe if we could get them health care, they would be less afraid to go back to work. So, these are just things that I don't have the answer to, but I'm happy to walk you through my cyclone of brainstorming about this.
So I think that there's a real opportunity for those working within municipalities and government right now to reflect and look back on everything that worked over the last 18 months. We were able to move policy forward fast. I mean, I'm only 34, but faster than I've ever seen. And I think that there's a lot of lessons we can learn about seeing how things worked through COVID for these small businesses, different areas of the state, to realize what's possible from a municipality and state perspective. One example I love to look at is the extension of premises permits that the state of Arizona pushed through to allow cities to have restaurants and retail shops extend their premises for dining, alcohol, whatever it was, into sidewalks, open spaces, parking lots, etc. Open carry laws in downtown areas. Got to give it to the city of Chandler. They were fast. Man, there we go. They were quick to get that working. And that benefited every single business. And I'll tell you a follow-up story to that. The Brickyard in downtown Chandler were able to move all their staff to salaried positions to be able to retain them. And that is because the city made a quick decision to allow that company to make more money through a pandemic. And so those are the results of types of things. When we talk about workers, when we talk about workforce, it's at every level. And so why wait for another pandemic for us to push forward these innovative solutions that grow jobs, keep workers employed, and drive revenue for our cities and towns? And so these are the types of things I think that we need to not let go, not forget about, not say no to, right? No more buts or ifs or why we can't. What can we do? What did we see work that we can keep working on?
Excellent. Slightly tweak question for you, Debbie. So we were talking about how organizations have to operate like a small business, and sometimes there's limited resources when needs are increasing. Have you noticed any change in the type of information that members have been seeking? You have an outstanding database, you provide good information in general. Have you had to tweak your focus? Because again, you can only do so much with limited resources, but is there anything in particular that you maybe had to shift away from to deal with some of the COVID issues that you'd maybe like to go back to? Just anything along those lines.
I think that it just keeps rearing its ugly head, and that is health insurance. I really scratch my head sometimes and try to go, why can't we figure this out and help the small businesses? Because when you talk about the benefits and all these different things that they're looking for, that is still a constant, even through the pandemic, even through years ago, even now. It just continues to be a problem, and I just don't, we've come up with different solutions, but it just seems to be not the best solution. But we try to come up with different options, but that is something in that health insurance world, I'm just perplexed on why is it so complicated. And I know people say that, why is it? And I guess there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I know for small businesses, the entrepreneurs that are going to start coming in, and we better be ready for them because they're going to start coming, starting their own businesses. The one person, the mom and pops that cannot get health insurance because they're combined. You can't have a married couple having health insurance, and so you have to go to the ACA, which is outrageous rates. And so there's just not a lot of options. And we want to be able to help them. So we look at different solutions and different ways that we can, but it's just not that right one yet. So we keep looking and hunting for that. I do want to just elaborate on one thing. My husband and I are a small business owner, and so we, I live it. I know we went through the 2009 recession. That was horrible. Here, went through the pandemic, and believe it or not, construction was actually, in 2009, it was horrible. Overnight, it went over, down the tubes. The pandemic, it actually thrived. Go figure. I mean, you just don't know this. But the one thing I do want to mention that we haven't really talked a lot about, and I think Jim mentioned a little bit about it, is definitely the supply chain. Businesses, I mean, you're all probably, if you're remodeling, if you're getting, new cabinets, flooring, or whatever, all of a sudden you're finding out that, furniture, it's not available. And so these are a lot of small businesses that are in that realm too that cannot, people are canceling their orders because they can't get the product. So it's just something I'm just mentioning that I think that is also something that it will pass at some point, but it's going to be very difficult for a lot of small businesses out there.
That wasn't a music ringtone, by the way, that I just heard. It's okay. I want to go to Q&A, and before we end, I want to give each of you a chance to just comment on what you think are the biggest takeaways that everybody should maybe have from this. But we still have about 15, 20 minutes. Would anybody like to ask questions of our fine panelists? Yes, sir.
Hi, everyone. I'm Councilman Harrison, City of Chandler. I guess my fundamental question is that a lot of the small businesses, they lack access to capital. And because they lack everybody. All right. Okay. Is it on? All right, there we go. All right, I'm Councilman Harris from the City of Chandler. And fundamentally, we talk about businesses needing access to capital. The problem is that if they go to a bank, they go to a large institute to get the loan, the problem that they have is that they don't get approved because they don't have certain systems in place. And to get the knowledge from the bank, to get the knowledge from them, they say, oh, this is what you need to do. You need to have a business plan. And I work with entrepreneurs that have a foundation called Ready, Set, Go. And even when they lie to you and say you need a business plan, even though you need a business plan, but you don't need a business plan, but you need to have a relationship, that's the link that's missing. And giving entrepreneurs a chance to actually, to get the access to capital, that's where I think our biggest miss is that we're having right now. And I do believe that it's a state problem as well, because the banks and everyone else is being controlled, and the people are being controlled, and we're not getting these mom and pops the opportunity. And I can just talk from the City of Chandler that we've had a lot of our small businesses close, and it breaks my heart because I get the emails as a councilman. I get the complaints as the councilman, and I get the complaints that rent is going up. And then I try to go out and build a relationship with the landlords to keep the rent under control. and then they go into this free market system, all that other stuff. So I guess my question is, what do you think are some things we can do better? We're talking to all these decision makers in this room. What can we do? What do you see the next steps for municipality? How do we work with our state legs? How do we get the senators and federal legs on board and corporations on board with not just giving organizations 10,000, 25,000, but getting them on board and say, hey, we're gonna invest 500,000 because that's a real investment. 5, 10, 25,000 is not a real investment to non-for-profits, to organizations. It's almost like they say, here's 25,000, I want to see what you can do with it. So I'll leave that out there. Hey, Thomas, how you doing, sir?
Hey.
We was just in the same room not long ago.
I got two answers. So first answer is, so Local First Arizona, we put together our Move Your Money campaign. Every April is Community Banking Month. We built relationships with 25 of the most active local banks and credit unions in the state. And every April, we put on an event where you can bring out, if you're a small business, come out, meet the president, meet the vice president, meet the people running these institutions, shake their hands, get to know them, and build a relationship. I'll tell you a quick story. There's a company called Keep It Cut. You may have heard it in your city these days. They've got 9 locations now. We met them when they had 1 location, and they were banking with Chase. And they went to Chase, and they said, we want to open up 2 more. And Chase said, no. But they remembered the bank, Commerce Bank of Arizona, that they met at the local First Arizona event 3 years before, called them up, they said, come on in. They now have 9 locations statewide. So those are the types of relationships that we can help build. So if you have small businesses looking for access to capital, looking for a relationship with a bank, let us be that resource for you. The other thing is that as cities, we can look where we're putting our money, right? And this is the hard pitch. Where are those savings accounts? Are they sitting with the 3 big guys, or are they going to go to local financial institutions that are right here that are going to take that money and then lend it right back out to the small businesses and the families in our community? So that's the challenge that I'd have, is to look at where are we actually putting our money as institutions that are here.
And I mean, I want to echo what you just said. When COVID was everything was happening, over the first 6 days, our team became a call center. So we called a lot of businesses, but we also, so the businesses were telling us they were confused exactly about what you're saying. We know there are these programs, but we're not really sure who's doing them, and we've called our bank, and no one could give me a clear answer. So we started calling the banks. So we got obsessed with finding somebody at each and every branch in our city and in the surrounding area, and we understood exactly why the businesses were very confused and frustrated. And I never underestimate the power of passion. So and definitely we called, out of the first 16 we called, there were 3 that took the time and understood the programs, and those 3 were referred all of the business they could handle. And so I think it's about finding your allies, which I love what you were doing, making those relationships and helping them find allies. And I have to give a shout out to ASBA, because they're helping us, and they've been helping us through the pandemic do the fundamental thing that I think businesses need to talk to other businesses, because they will, the one person that's figuring it out with the bank that's figuring it out will tell 10 people. And so, I mean, that's what I love that ASBA's been able to do for us and help us get our businesses networked. They're helping us stand up some business networking events starting this fall, hopefully in person. So, but yeah, so I think for me, that's the critical thing. Getting businesses to talk to other businesses, getting that back, because that's really suffered, and then figuring out your good ones. Your good banks, your good people at those banks that are just ready to go. So that's been key for us.
Yeah, I think that the pandemic certainly opened up a lot of eyes for small businesses. We got a lot of calls also, sad calls. And I know you probably received the same calls where, they can't make their car payment, their house payment. It was just very sad. But what they found out is that they've had a relationship with their bank, or at least they thought they did. They just did kind of the normal processing with the big banks, and that they couldn't help them through the PPPs and things that were really critical. And so we did step up and help them with the CARES Act and things like that. But I guess my if I wanted to expand a little bit more, is just the resources that just from you two right there, being able to share that, where we can share it also with the small businesses, because instead of me trying to go out there and recreate that, it would be very difficult. But if you've got the relationships and the information, let's share it, and so that we can get that information out there, and so that that's the best thing for small business, and that's why we're here. So.
And that was an incredibly good question, because it addressed two issues. One is, how can a small business get the information that's needed to get that loan or have access to capital? But also, there is just that underlying issue of people being underbanked because the system as a whole isn't as efficient as it needs to be. And it just adds to that complexity. And I even remember when I started my business a few years ago, I went to my bank for a line of credit where I already had my mortgage through, I had a bunch of investments through, and I thought I was a good bet, and they gave me a hard time about a line of credit because they just went through a little matrix saying, here's the dollar amount. And I said it was wasting my time, so I spent the next 3 months making fun of Wells Fargo in my speeches. But that is a critical issue. We probably still have time for another couple of questions if anybody has any.
Real quick. Well, Chandler doesn't want to dominate everything, but I needed to say something. I'm Christine Ellis, a council member with the city of Chandler. So it is important also to recognize the fact that a lot of us make great decisions for our constituents, and Chandler did. We took $9.5 million out of the money that we receive, and we put it out there for our small businesses also. But the fact of the matter at this point is, how do we corral everybody together to recognize when there is a need and where to go for the need? I mean, there's a great panel sitting here. You are a wealth of information. We would love to capture that, put it in a bottle, and then just sell it, or dispense it to people that really need it. But unless you're in this room or you have access to yourself, where's that information is? Where can we point people? When we received those emails that I'm gonna close my business, I remember when you mentioned 2007, I went to bed Monday night, Tuesday morning I lost $5 million and we never recovered. But there are people right now that are trying to recover, and as a city, and we want to give people that option. We want to open doors where people can come in and find the solutions that you are talking about right now. How do they do it? I love the what, the why, but the how, that's where we have to major in. Thank you.
Excellent point. Anybody want to make a comment on that? The point kind of stands by itself.
I second you. I mean, that is the how are we going to do that? And I think that's a challenge for us. I mean, I think that we have some of the information. We have so much information. How can we all combine it and get together and provide it so that you would know where to send people to get the answers? And so I think that's a challenge for us. And so I think that's something that we can work together on and somehow figure that out and personally reach out to you and say, well, here's the solution.
I love that point. So I'll tell you just a quick story. I promise not to go over. But about 5 years ago, we had what I now call our COVID dress rehearsal. And the folks from Surprise will remember, we were constructing a bridge project that impacted, it was directly closing an intersection that would impact the livelihoods of 277 businesses. And that was for an 8-month duration. So we learned to over-communicate. So it was going door to door, making phone calls, setting up a website, making sure that you empower, actually, and I'll shock you with this, empower the lowest level of staff to make decisions and to communicate with businesses, and then over-communicate with residents about what's going on, and then celebrate obnoxiously when any success happens and during that process. And it seemed to be a formula that works in terms of getting that information out there. But it came through a very targeted campaign. But I'm with you. You kind of wish we could always. That's just in the ethos. Everyone knows when you have an issue or you're going to close that you go to Local First Arizona, you go to ASBA, or your local ED department.
Any other questions?
Hello, my name is Hector Bojorquez. I'm from Nogales, Arizona City Council. My question is, with online shopping was very popular before the pandemic, and now with the pandemic, it got even more because of health issues. How can we encourage small businesses to compete with online shopping? And is this cost efficient for them to go and get a loan to continue their business when they have to compete with large businesses like Amazon and eBay, et cetera? How do we encourage the small businesses to continue doing advancing in their whatever they're selling?
Awesome question, especially for rural small businesses. So in April 2020, we not only were analyzing things at a local level, but looked nationwide. What were consumers doing? Skyrocketed, higher numbers than ever shopping online. So again, trying to predict as fast as we possibly could what were going to happen to every single boutique, caterer, food vendor, everything that was not going to have a festival to sell at fall, winter 2020 and beyond. And those trends weren't going to change. There was predictions that showed that, pharmaceuticals, groceries, all of these things that people were purchasing, curbside pickup or online, they were still going to increase. They were still going to stay doing it long term. And so we built a website. It's called Shop Arizona. It's an online e-commerce website for Arizona small businesses that they can list their items on if they don't have a website or even if they have one. And we market it to the world. We put it out to 450,000 of our followers. We have people buying products from all across the country who used to live in Arizona, who've got kids going to college in Arizona, buying them gifts. We have people from Tucson selling to Gold Canyon, to Kingman. It's a great, great resource. Would love to share it with you. It's just shop.localfirstaz.com, or I can connect with you and we can help the businesses in your town get onboarded.
Yeah, it looks like we are running out of town, which the panelists will like, because I wanted their closing points to be in the form of a haiku. So it would have been a little bit more challenging, so you got out of that. But I hope this was helpful. I think that this is something where it can be talked about for hours, not at the same time, but I feel like we're going to have to keep pushing on this, so I hope everybody is motivated to work in this area that's so critical. And please join me in thanking the panelists. This was a really good discussion.